Right now, we're inside a computer program?
Is it really so hard to believe? Your clothes are different, the plugs in your arms and head are gone. Your hair has changed. Your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
When the Matrix film came out, I thought, wow, this is Berkeley for a popular mass audience. George Berkeley was an Anglican bishop living in the 18th century Ireland. He came right after Sir Isaac Newton, and he was very worried about the effects of the Newtonian worldview. Berkeley realized correctly that if we follow the Newtonian ideology, you don't need God, you don't need spirituality, you don't need the soul, you don't need anything other than what can be described by equations. And that bothered him, because he wanted to feel there is a divine presence in the world.
Berkeley had the most radical solution, which was just to deny that there is a world external to our ideas. Reality just is the ideas that you have of it.
What he said was, well, you have an overinflated conception of reality. Here's what reality is. Appearance is reality. To exist is to be perceived. So reality only exists in your subjective experiences.
We think of ourselves as subjects over against objects. Subjects are these self-sufficient beings, and objects are these things that they dominate and control, and as the story goes, objectify. This idea of being a self-contained subject is a Descartes invention, and that name is a Descartes invention.
It is not the spoon that bends, it is only yourself.
So he invents modernity, and he invents, it takes Kant to come along and finish it.
Kant was taken by the question of, well, you know, how can we know what things are in and of themselves? Is appearance any reasonable reflection of reality? And Kant is famous for concluding that there's really very little we know about what reality is like in and of itself.
And his point was that actually the mind has structures that impose structure on the world and actually create worlds in certain ways. So that we're not perceiving a pre-given world, but the structures of the mind are bringing forth phenomena created as much by the mind as by whatever it is that's out there.
When you sit at a table and you touch the table and you see the table, you have these phenomena, you have these conscious experiences of color, of shape, of tactile pressure. But these phenomena are not the ultimate causes. Kant was convinced that there was something beyond that, which is reasonable, because we don't control our phenomena. If I look up at the sky, I can't change it from blue to pink. There's something out there which is generating these sense perceptions, these phenomena, and giving them to us.
A simple way to summarize Kant is that he maintained that the world was the product of a matrix, that the structures of the mind bring forth the world.
I thought it wasn't real.
Your mind makes it real.
And then, of course, Nietzsche is always in the shadow. I mean, you know, God is dead, love is dead, we are dead. How do you come to terms with new conceptions of love after you've crossed the Rubicon, in which you acknowledge that it's not simply about obedience to an authority, it's about creating yourself through choices and decisions.
You have to break out of the herd mentality. Man will overcome man in an Ubermensch, a Superman. God became man so that man could become God.
Don't think you are. Know you are.
I share with Nietzsche the idea that we're at our best when we're not conscious, which sounds a little wacky, but if you think of athletes in flow, when they're playing at their best, they say they don't even know what they're doing until afterward. And chess grandmasters, I've heard say the same thing, that their arm goes out and makes a move before they even have time to become aware of or think about what's going on.
In Nietzsche's philosophy, there is simply a world of people who are locked into their constructs. They are born into systems of valuation in which one thing is good, another thing is bad, they must do this, they must do that. And what defines a Superman is that he rejects all of those constructs.
Neo, no one has ever done anything like this.
That's why it's going to work.
He doesn't give them force. He sees through them and decides he will use his own will to do what he wants.
The herd mentality can be thought of as the matrix. Everybody's having a collective hallucination. And everybody's thinking, seeing the same thing and so on, which is just an absolute nightmare for somebody who wants to wake up, and which would be a nightmare for Nietzsche.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
According to continental philosophers, we're now in the postmodern condition, a condition in which reality has all but disappeared. And in fact, one of the interesting things about Baudrillard is that if you take him seriously, he appears to hold that reality has disappeared.
Postmodernists are fond of thinking of their work as something sort of radically different from what's gone on before, but I think it's a sort of straightforward extrapolation of the sort of stuff we get in Kant, and the idea that the world is in some way or other a construction of what's going on in my mind.
It's really striking that it's one of the few movies that shows a work by a real philosopher in the context of the movie. So Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation turns up towards the beginning of the movie in this book that Neo has its contraband software in.
If we turn to page 1 of Simulacra and Simulation, we see Baudrillard commenting on a Borges fable in which cartographers of an empire create a map that is so perfect and coextensive with geography that it touches the real geography at every point. What's really interesting is that for Baudrillard, the map is what's important. The map has primacy for us. The map is a simulacrum that, as a model, loses all reference to reality. In Baudrillard's fable, reality exists only as rotting shreds that are attached to the map. And this is the state of our age, according to Baudrillard, that the model itself has primacy for us. The real has become irrelevant, if undefinable, and clings only as vestiges. And he's coined the phrase, the desert of the real, to describe the state of our age.
In the case of Cypher, the film is quite clear that the life of the people within the Matrix is quite agreeable, it's quite happy, it's quite pleasant.
I know this state doesn't exist. You know what I realize? Ignorance is bliss.
It's just that all their beliefs are false. So they're happy, though they don't know anything.
He's making a deal to be plugged in a paradisial setting. And that is a metaphor of what it is that keeps us asleep. We want illusory safety, being asleep when we think we're awake. We want to be numb.
This relates to a very famous thought experiment in philosophy. The philosopher Robert Nozick imagined a thing called the experience machine.
Nozick says, imagine that you have this machine that's a kind of perfect simulation machine that can give you any experience you desire, no strings attached. Plug in, live out a fantasy life, and then not even ever know that you plugged in.
I can't go back, can I?
No. But if you could, would you really want to?
Nozick says, well, most people wouldn't plug in because you don't just care about pleasure. You care about being in touch with reality in a kind of basic, primitive, logically primitive way. I mean, this is just one of our fundamental concerns, that not just that we live a happy life, but that we live a real life, that we be in touch with the truth.
Do you believe in fate, Neo?
No,
Why not?
because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean.
In philosophy, one of the perennial questions is the nature of free will. And we all think that we have free will, but it turns out when you start to try to answer the question of what free will is, it looks uncomfortably like we couldn't have it.
If we're purely physical beings, as the first Matrix film seems to suggest, then perhaps we have no free will at all.
I'd ask you to sit down, but you're not going to anyway.
If the Oracle's knowledge really reflected one way that the future could unfold, well then Neo isn't free or responsible for any of his actions. He's just playing out a path that's been set in nature or in motion by something completely independent of him.
Are the people in this film free? Are they in control of their destinies? The first film raises this in an interesting way because you have these pronouncements from the Oracle which suggest a kind of, well, fatalism, or suggest that maybe everything's already written in stone.
You're going to have to make a choice. In the one hand, you'll have Morpheus's life. And in the other hand, you'll have your own.
Thank you.